Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. The sound of breaking glass in the empty theater. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. The Return. Evan pulled his collar up against the evening chill, hands buried in his coat pockets as he walked down the deserted city street. The theater loomed just ahead, hidden in the shadows of towering buildings, its marquee cracked and lifeless. Once, years ago, he had stood under that same sign in a daze of nerves and excitement, ready to take the stage. Now, he felt only dread pulling him forward. The streetlights flickered as he walked, casting a sickly glow across the sidewalk, and he couldn't help but notice the quiet. No voices from passing cars, no buzz of late-night city life, just the distant hum of traffic, dulled as if by layers of fog. This part of the city had died when the theater had closed, and tonight the empty street felt like a pathway into some other world, a place where time had no hold. He slowed as he reached the theater entrance, his breath catching as he took it in. The theater looked exactly as he'd left it, worn down by years of neglect, but holding on to its own eerie, forgotten grandeur. The once bright posters now faded, with his own face barely visible beneath layers of peeling paper and grime, a ghostly reminder of his younger self staring out from a time that felt lifetimes away. Evan's fingers grazed the door handle, cold and stiff beneath his touch. For a moment, he thought of turning back, of leaving this haunted place behind him once more, but something inside urged him forward. Maybe it was guilt, that familiar weight pressing down on his shoulders, the memory of an accident everyone but him seemed to have moved past. Or maybe it was curiosity, a need to confront the shadows that had lingered in his mind since that night. The door creaked as he pushed it open, echoing through the darkened lobby. Dust hung in the air, suspended like tiny stars in the dim light filtering through a cracked window. He took a step inside, feeling the pull of the stage beyond, the place where everything had gone wrong. As he moved deeper into the theater, he couldn't shake the sensation that he wasn't alone. His footsteps sounded louder than they should have, as if someone or something was listening. A shiver ran down his spine, and he paused, glancing back at the door, half expecting to see it close on its own. But the lobby was still, silent, holding its breath. With a deep breath, he turned and moved toward the stage, where the past waited in silence. Chapter 2. Shadows of the Past. Evan's footsteps echoed through the lobby as he moved farther into the darkened theater, the air thick with the scent of dust and stale velvet. Shadows stretched and warped under the weak glow of his phone flashlight, each shape playing tricks on his mind. But it wasn't until he stepped into the main hall that he felt it shift in the air. Something watching him, hidden in the corners where the light didn't reach. He kept walking, slowly, across the faded carpet towards the rows of seats that faced the stage. His gaze snagged on a discarded playbill lying atop a seat, creased and yellowed with age. Bending down, he picked it up, brushing the dust off the cover. His own face stared back at him, younger and bright-eyed, smiling for an audience that no longer existed. The memories hit him like a punch to the gut. Flashes of lights, applause, lines he used to know by heart. He remembered the final night, the last performance, the one that had sealed the theater's fate. But the details blurred whenever he tried to focus, slipping from his mind like water through his fingers. All he knew was the overwhelming guilt that had followed him, refusing to leave him even years later. A sharp sound pierced the silence, a faint, brittle crack, like glass breaking. He froze, heart pounding, straining his ears. The sound faded, swallowed by the heavy silence, but the unease it left lingered, crawling up his spine. He took a deep breath and pushed forward, but every step seemed to echo with that faint, haunting sound. As he neared the stage, whispers began to drift through the air, distorted and hollow, as if coming from somewhere far, far away. He turned his flashlight toward the stage, half expecting to see someone standing there, but the boards lay bare, draped in shadows. Fragments of the accident that closed the theater started to swirl in his mind. He saw brief, disjointed images, a flicker of stage lights, his own hands outstretched in horror, a pair of wide, terrified eyes staring back at him. But just as quickly as they came, the memories slipped away, leaving a hollow ache in his chest. Evans swallowed, shaking off the chills crawling over his skin. The sound of breaking glass echoed faintly once more, and he knew he wasn't alone with just memories in this place. Whatever was haunting this theater and him had waited a long time for his return. Chapter 3: The First Vision. Evan climbed the creaking stairs leading to the stage, each step sending a low groan through the empty space. The whispers grew louder, slipping through the heavy silence like fingers across piano keys, every sound slightly off, echoing back to him in distorted fragments. It was as if the theater itself was trying to speak to him, pulling him deeper into memories he barely recognized. Reaching the stage, he aimed his flashlight toward the wings, catching glimpses of scattered costumes, faded, moth-eaten pieces of the theater's past. One costume lay across a chair, dusty and familiar, with a small tear at the shoulder. He blinked, a chill creeping over him. That costume had been his. He was sure of it. He'd worn it the night of the accident, though he couldn't recall why it was torn or how it had ended up abandoned like this. He moved closer, fingers brushing the fabric, and a jolt of cold shot up his arm, gripping him in a momentary freeze. Suddenly, the stage lights flickered on, and he staggered back, nearly dropping his flashlight. The air thickened, heavy with anticipation, and he felt a strange pull toward the center of the stage. For a fleeting moment, he saw himself back there on that final night, surrounded by the glow of the house lights, with an audience he couldn't see beyond the brightness. He felt his mouth moving, reciting lines he no longer remembered, felt the rush of performance, the applause waiting to break. But this time, he wasn't alone. A figure stood across from him, half hidden in the shadows, unmoving. He squinted, but their face remained obscured, almost as if the darkness itself clung to them. The figure took a step forward, and with it came a loud crack, the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. Evan flinched, his heart slamming in his chest as the memory broke apart, his surroundings snapping back to the empty, decayed theater. He staggered off the stage, the vision still clouding his thoughts. The whispers faded, leaving him in silence, but the sense of dread didn't lift. Instead, it deepened, filling the theater with an almost tangible weight, as if daring him to come back. Evan backed away, his pulse pounding, his mind racing with fragments of what he'd seen. Whatever had happened here hadn't left, not fully. It waited, lurking just beyond his memory, threatening to drag him back to that fateful night, one piece at a time. Chapter 4: Descent into Madness. Evan stumbled down the aisle, his breaths ragged, hands trembling. He didn't know what he'd just seen or why it felt so real, but every instinct screamed for him to get out. The theater, once a familiar and comforting space, now felt like a trap waiting to spring. He made his way toward the exit, hoping that fresh air would clear his mind. But as he reached for the lobby doors, a chilling thought prickled at the back of his mind. What if they didn't open? The handle was cold and unyielding under his grip. He pulled harder, but the door wouldn't budge. Panic bloomed in his chest. He turned, searching for another way out, and spotted a door to the left he didn't remember noticing before. Maybe a side exit. He pushed through, heart hammering, but instead of an alley or street, he found himself in a narrow hallway, dimly lit by a flickering bulb overhead. The walls closed in as he walked, lined with old posters, some bearing his own face, smiling back at him through decades of dust and grime. His footsteps echoed, blending with faint, distorted whispers that rose and fell like a forgotten tune. They seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere, growing louder as he turned a corner and found himself in the dressing room corridor. A chill ran down his spine as he opened one of the dressing room doors. The small, cluttered room was dim, and his flashlight's beam caught on his old costume, lying on the vanity chair, frayed and covered in dust, the tear at the shoulder still gaping like an open wound. He moved closer, compelled to touch it, as if it might explain the memory that haunted him, but something else caught his eye, the mirror. In its tarnished glass, he saw not just his own reflection, but faint, distorted faces shifting behind him. Actors, faces he vaguely recognized from past performances, appeared and faded, mouths moving soundlessly, eyes locked onto him with a hollow intensity. His heart pounded, and he tore his gaze away, only to hear the loud crack of breaking glass, a sound that seemed to come from every corner of the room. The whispers crescendoed, filling the air like an invisible presence pressing in on him. Shadows danced at the edge of his vision, shifting whenever he turned his head, only to vanish when he looked directly at them. His chest tightened as the suffocating realization set in the theater wasn't going to let him leave. It was pulling him deeper, each step dragging him further from reality and into something darker, something that had waited in silence, hidden in the corners of his memory, and was now clawing its way back to him. Chapter 5: The Haunting Truth. Evan's breath came in shallow gasps as he backed away from the mirror, refusing to look again at the faces that had stared at him from its dusty glass. He stumbled down the hallway, every nerve tingling with the sense of something watching, something waiting in the shadows just out of sight. His foot caught on something, and he stumbled, looking down to see an old, tattered journal lying on the floor, its spine cracked and its pages yellowed with age. He knelt, picked it up, and turned the cover. Scrawled inside was a name he vaguely recognized: Sam Turner, one of the stagehands who had been around the night of the accident. He flipped through the brittle pages, his heart sinking as he read fragmented notes, entries that spoke of unease, strange occurrences, and a cast gripped by fear. Something feels wrong here. Every night, the whispers get louder. I swear, the shadows move when no one's looking. And the lead actor, there's something not right with him. Everyone feels it. The entries grew darker, describing tensions among the cast, odd accidents on set, and, finally, unsettling words about the actor who died, the same one whose face Evan could barely remember now, whose presence still seemed to linger in this haunted place. Everyone thinks it was just an accident, but I'm not so sure. There was something in his eyes that night, something wild, as if he knew something the rest of us didn't. Evan's hands began to shake, and he felt a sudden, oppressive weight pressing down on his chest, heavy and suffocating. He could hear faint footsteps in the distance, slowly approaching, echoing down the narrow hall. He tried to shake it off, telling himself it was just his imagination, but the pressure grew, making it hard to breathe, as if invisible hands were closing around his lungs. He turned to leave, but his legs felt leaden, refusing to obey. The footsteps grew louder, unhurried but purposeful, and a chill crept up his spine as he sensed something closing in. Cold breath brushed the back of his neck, sending ice through his veins. He froze, afraid to turn, knowing deep down that whatever was behind him was something he couldn't face. The journal slipped from his hands, and he barely registered it falling to the floor, his entire being focused on the presence hovering just out of sight. The theater's grip tightened, its dark past bleeding into the present, dragging him further into a nightmare that seemed to have no end. Chapter 6: Confrontation. Evan knew what he had to do. The journal's words echoed in his mind, fragmented memories, stirring to life, pieces of the past clawing to the surface. The theater had taken on a life of its own, fueled by fear, regret, and something far darker. With a grim determination, he found himself back in the main hall, walking toward the stage, where he felt the heart of the haunting pulsed, waiting. The air felt colder as he neared, thick with the scent of dust and old wood. But there was something else, a faint, coppery tang that made his stomach turn. He took a steadying breath, his flashlight flickering over the warped boards and darkened seats. This was the spot, the place where it had all gone wrong. He was sure of it. As if sensing his intent, the stage lights snapped on, flooding the room in a harsh, ghostly glow. Evan flinched, but forced himself forward, stepping onto the stage. Each step felt heavier, as though the floor itself resisted, pulling him back into the past he'd tried so hard to bury. Broken glass now glittered across the floor, jagged shards catching the light. He recognized the fragments, the same glass he remembered from that night, scattered in a violent arc, remnants of the accident that had destroyed everything. He took his place, feeling like an actor trapped in a role he couldn't escape. The whispers surged, mingling with the steady, relentless sound of breaking glass, as if the theater itself mocked his every move. He closed his eyes and tried to speak the lines from that final scene, his voice shaking as he pushed past the memories, but the words caught in his throat, twisted and garbled, as if they weren't his to say anymore. A shape appeared at the edge of the stage, barely visible, hovering in the shadows. Evan's pulse spiked as he squinted, almost sure he saw the fallen actor, the one whose life had been claimed that night. His voice cracked as he called out, but the figure remained silent, only watching as Evan struggled, trapped in a loop, unable to break free from the reenactment. Then, the stage shifted, the scene playing out in gruesome detail. The flicker of lights, the scream that had echoed in his nightmares, and the actor's wide, terrified eyes staring into his. Each detail sharpened, sinking its claws into him. Evan moved to reach the figure, but his feet felt rooted in place, locked in the theater's suffocating grip. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices pressing against his ears, filling his mind. Shadows closed in, encircling him, each step he took toward the center, deepening the horror, trapping him in that endless nightmarish moment. He realized, with a sinking certainty, that this theater wasn't just haunted, it was alive, feeding on his fear, his memories, dragging him deeper with each step until he was no longer certain he'd ever escape. Chapter 7. Revelation. Evan stood at the center of the stage, a marionette caught in the strings of a dark puppeteer. The shadows loomed larger, swirling around him, and the whispers crescendoed into a cacophony, drowning out everything else. The once familiar theater was shifting walls, bending like they were breathing, lights flickering in a chaotic dance. Panic clawed at his chest, but a sharper edge sliced through the chaos, a dawning realization that cut deeper than any scream. The glass scattered on the floor shimmered ominously, reflecting fractured images of his past, each shard telling a story he had long buried. And then it hit him, the weight of guilt, the gnawing suspicion that he had been the architect of that night's horror. The whispers began to form words, coalescing to a voice that he recognized, one he had tried to forget. "You could have saved him." "No," he shouted, but the sound felt hollow, swallowed by the theater's malevolent embrace. The broken glass crackled underfoot, echoing the sound of his own heart racing. The face in the mirror he had seen before now loomed in his mind, his own face, but twisted and contorted by grief, haunted by the specter of loss. It mirrored a truth he had fought against for too long. He had been there that night. His distraction, his negligence had contributed to the disaster. The blame wasn't just on the spirits of the theater. It lay heavy on his shoulders. The walls trembled, distorting as he stood frozen, a cyclone of emotions swirling within him. Glass shattered above, raining down like a storm of grief. Each shard that broke represented a piece of his sanity slipping away, puncturing the veil of reality he had clung to. The theater was a reflection of his crumbling mind, a labyrinth of his regrets, each corner echoing his failure to act. Evan clutched his head, feeling as if the walls were closing in, the very foundation of the theater morphing into a grotesque caricature of his inner turmoil. "It wasn't my fault," he screamed into the void, the sound swallowed by the relentless chaos. But deep down, a part of him knew the truth. He had allowed fear to paralyze him. He had turned away when he should have reached out. And now, this haunting was less about restless spirits and more about his own tortured psyche, battling against the unrelenting guilt that threatened to consume him. The stage lights flickered violently, illuminating the torment in his eyes, casting shadows that danced like mocking phantoms. As he faced the mirror of his own making, the shattering glass echoed the fissures in his mind. The theater wasn't just a place. It was a prison of his own design, a hell born of his regrets, and now, it seemed, he might never escape. Chapter 8. The Final Curtain. The weight of the truth hung heavy in the air, smothering Evan beneath layers of despair and dread. He stood on the stage, the heartbeat of the theater pulsing around him, whispering promises of release and dragging him into its suffocating depths. The glass shards littered the floor, twinkling like malevolent stars in a darkened sky, reminding him that every step he took could cut deeper than he could bear. He felt trapped between two choices: to confront the shadows one last time, or to flee into the night, leaving behind the memories that bound him. The theater groaned, its walls alive with a restless energy, shadows flickering in the periphery, as if waiting for him to decide. Each whisper became a shout in his head, a cacophony of voices imploring him to stay, to confront the darkness he had so long avoided. Yet another part of him screamed to run, to escape the malevolence that seeped from the very foundation of this place. Taking a deep breath, he stepped closer to the edge of the stage. The air felt electric, charged with something ancient and resentful. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every corner of the room echoing the silent judgment of the spirits still trapped within the theater's grasp. "I'm not afraid of you," he shouted into the void, but even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at his resolve. As he turned toward the exit, the theater roared to life, the lights flickering violently, casting chaotic patterns that danced like tortured souls. The broken glass seemed to shatter anew, creating a symphony of sound that clawed at his sanity. He could feel the theater's eyes upon him, watching, waiting to see if he would turn back. Each step toward the door felt like a betrayal, leaving meant abandoning the echoes of his past, the haunting memories that had been his only companions. He reached the doorway, hesitating. Behind him, the stage was a vortex of shadows and whispers, pulling him back with an irresistible force. He could almost hear the fallen actor's voice among the murmurs, urging him to come back, to make amends. But what could he possibly do to atone for a tragedy that had shattered lives? Finally, he took a step into the cool night air, the crisp breeze washing over him like a balm. He had chosen to leave, to reclaim the pieces of himself that the theater had taken. But as he glanced back, the sight froze his blood. The shattered glass glittered ominously in the dim light, a haunting reminder that the theater was still very much alive, its vengeful spirit watching him go. In that moment, a chill wrapped around him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the theater was not done with him yet. Had he escaped, or had he merely taken the first step into a new torment? The final curtain hung in the air, leaving him with an unsettling sense of ambiguity, a question unanswered. The theater, it seemed, would always be there, waiting for the day he might return.